And welcome back to Shadow Warrior. I'm still an hour related, and I guess we have to do it. I have really been trying to put this off as far as possible, but I guess for completion's sake we have to do it. Let's waste the Chi Crystal and learn Protection. Protection is shit. It starts completely useless, and with upgrades it becomes merely terrible. I'll go back to whining about Protection in a bit, but for now take a moment and perceive our surroundings. We are back in a city area fighting a SWAT team, obviously. And this kind of reinforces my theory that the previous level, also yay,
your insurance covers loss of limbs and possibly head.
That the previous level was a filler that was put in after the rest of the game was done. Since if you remember, chapter 4 was about us getting out of the city towards a more outlying area.
At least there's a cemetery nearby.
There is one more piece of evidence suggesting that chapter 4 was pretty much shoehorned in, and it concerns a possible plot hole, but it's something we won't find out about until pretty much the very end of the game. So I'd just suggest you take note of this.
Great. I needed a change of pace.
How far is the temple from here?
Just up this hill. Third carnage on the left. Can't miss it.
This guy's a skeleton, and skeletons are complete chumps. They go down in one of pretty much anything. I don't really understand the purpose of this enemy here. I know what their place and their job is, and we'll encounter that soon enough, but putting them here on their own just makes no sense at all. Observe their efficiency in this particular fight, because I'm not playing very well at this run, and I get hit a couple times. Yeah. Pretty much the only reason I managed to take any damage at all was that I somehow set myself on fire at the end. Anyway, this chapter sets the new record for the amount of secrets. It has 11, and this time they are somewhat hard to find. It also includes a fairly unique secret, but that's near the end of the level. The graveyard we'll be spending most of our time of this level on is actually a fairly big place with a lot of detours and dead ends that mostly contain nothing or just little bits of money. I'm not showing that much of it because honestly it would just inflate the video and there's not that much to see. This square is pretty much its central hub area and we'll be coming back here several times.
There's the temple.
That's where she's headed. Come on.
Here I'm trying to pick off the demons one by one without closing too much on the big green guy in the distance because he means trouble. And yes, Flux Crossbow is probably my favorite weapon combo in the entire game. It sends enemies into the fucking stratosphere. You may notice that the tide of enemy demons I'm trying to deal with here doesn't really diminish.
Meet Piñata.
There's a reason for it, and what I'm doing here is actually pretty stupid. And the video game playing me will realize that in just a second. He's a bit slower on the uptake, you see. The signal I'm doing something wrong is actually the green skeleton coming at me.
Give me a break. This guy is raising corpses.
They'll keep coming back unless you take them out.
The big green enemy is called a shaman. Shaman? Yeah, that. And they're the trickier, nastier brothers of the warlords. As Wang points out, they can raise dead enemies, and this actually also applies to dismembered corpses, so the obvious solution doesn't work here. Their main attacks are throwing a green fireball that explodes into poisonous mist that deals damage over time and slows us, a giant fuck-off shockwave that sets the ground on fire, and summoning green skeletons. He can also summon 3 or 4 burning skeletons at once and surround himself with a barrier. That barrier is completely impervious to all damage until the skeletons are dead. Undead. Re-dead. Not moving anymore. Kinda like what I wish this guy did. About goddamn time. For all my talk about how I like the crossbow, I'm not exactly its best user. Anyway, following is a brief period of nothing in key collection, so back to the matter of hand. Protection and why we hate it. Protection is the spell cast by pressing left and holding the right mouse button. What it does is raise a shield in front of Wang that absorbs 40% of melee damage. Yep, that's it. Oh, and it also slows our movement by half. But guy with an unpronounceable name and an even worse accent, I hear you cry. Aren't the powers in this game upgradable? Don't they all get better with time? Well, yes and no. I've briefly went over the upgrades at the start of the video, but here's what they amount to. The protection gets increased to 50% of the damage, the enemies who hit us in melee have a chance to be knocked down, the protection will apply to the sides, and, as probably the best part, the protection will also apply to ranged attacks. Now, if all this was available at the first level, and the protection had another set of upgrades, I might consider it useful. As it is, it's simply not worth it to sacrifice half of your mobility for a spell that doesn't work most of the time and sucks when it does. Off the top of my head, I can think of about 3 situations in the entire game where I'd even consider this as somewhat useful. And that's assuming I'd waste 5 crystals on fully upgrading the thing. Spoilers, I won't. We probably won't ever see it in action. It's pointless, it's not well thought out, and I wish they'd bothered putting something more useful in its place. Rant over. Now, what you're actually trying to do now is looking for 3 key shrines. It's pretty much the go-to objective in this game, but in this case it's pretty subtle, because the only way to find out where your target is looking out of the window in the shack where you found the padlock keys. And I actually think it's better to not notice that, because the padlock keys open up a lot of areas throughout the whole graveyard. There are secrets, there are detours, and there are the key shrines. And it's all focused on exploration. Again, I'm taking a pretty efficient way through the level, which means not looking through all of it.
I need 2 more, please.
But if you take your time and explore the graveyard, you can find a lot more money and ammo than I have. I do apologize for the loading screens in this section. A lot of people who played this game had problems with them. I never really noticed them that much, but having the recording software running as well as the game simply lets them all out. You might find it odd that I'm focusing on taking out the relatively harmless flying demons first, and that's kind of a relic from playing this game on higher difficulties.
That was nice!
The flyers happen to have an extremely nasty surprise move they can only access when they are enraged, so I'm trying to clear the skies before they get any opportunity to use it. The final ambush on our way back from the Red Shrine consists of several pre-enraged birdmen, and honestly it's pretty trivial. Now that we have the crossbow, it's very hard for the demons to beat Wang in a straight-out shooting contest. Speaking of the crossbow, as much as I'm hopelessly in love with this weapon, we're not upgrading it fully.
Sorry, did I step on your grave?
One of its upgrades only increases its ammo capacity in the clip. 16 bolts is more than enough to kill anything that moves. Especially with the help of some perks. Guardslayer is the bigger version of Demon Slayer. It adds 10% to our damage towards large enemies, that is warlords and shamans. Again, I should probably emphasize that when playing through this level normally, you'd find the various padlocked buildings in more natural ways and uncover the secrets by non-linear exploration. I've played it several times and plotted a path through, so if it looks like somewhat unnatural progression, it's because it is. I think this is actually our first look at a partially unlocked gate. The game tracks what key shrines you managed to destroy and which one you still need to break. Given the design of the levels, it's just cosmetic.
So, the Shadow Realm, is that hell?
No more than this place is. It's just different.
But it's full of demons.
Yes, but this place is full of humans.
One more.
The remaining 2, wait a bit, I have written it down, Tentoki shrines, are in this underground complex under the graveyard. I don't know anything about Japanese burial traditions, so whether cave burial is common or not, but I have to say I find the layout of this place a bit suspicious. A real estate agent would really have to try to sell me on this cemetery, is what I'm saying. This little secret, by the way, destroyed 2 of my recordings, because even if you know about it, it's really easy to miss that passage.
Looks like a dead baboon in here.
And that's the worst case of loading screen it is I've ever seen in the game. Now this fight I want to talk about a bit. When I originally played the game, this is where I first got killed. Well, by means of monsters, not, you know, dashing down slopes or trying to force Wank to commit hygiene. It's hard. There are enemies coming at you from all directions, there are birdmen blinking at you, and there's a shaman who starts in a location you don't see at the beginning of the fight. He does see you though. The TNT barrels, while being completely useless against enemies, can actually hurt you quite a lot. And with the amount of fireballs flying around this place, it's usually better to trigger them yourself when no one is around. That green lightning bolt is a shaman reviving an enemy. If the green skeletons didn't clue you in, this is a dead giveaway of there being one in the vicinity. A couple videos ago I talked about the similarities between this game and Painkiller, and the gas attacks are one of those. I think they are a pretty clever way of limiting the player's movement without feeling forced or annoying, because you can, to a certain extent, manipulate where they land. It's kind of like one of those JRPG quote puzzles unquote with a cracked floor, except while everything around you is trying to murder you. On a side note, when you're using a crossbow against the enemy, you really should wait until he's stuck in one of its attack animations, otherwise they'll just jump or roll to the side. Behold. Okay, not the first one, that's just me being shit at aiming. But I think the Birdman shootout kind of delivers the point. By now I'm reasonably certain I managed to kill everything except for the shaman, which should give me a decent window of time in which I can deal with him. A shaman being present essentially turns what would otherwise be a fairly trivial fight into a matter of strategy. You really need to know your pacing, your priorities, and when to hit what. A general rule of thumb I came up with when playing through this on Insane is that when a shaman is accompanied by 6 or more monsters, forget about him, run, deal with them. This is on normal, so I can afford a bit more leniency, but they still shouldn't be underestimated. On a somewhat unrelated note, anyone else feels that shaman is a really stupid name for the monster? I generally associate the word with the cultures of America or Siberia. The only time I ever came into contact with it in a remotely Asian context was in the novels of Barry Hugard. On the other hand, if you can't trust comedic fantasy novels from the 80s, what can you trust? Oh, and you'd have to be a complete fucking moron to fall for this trap. More than 3 or 4 times anyway. At this point we're done with the underground, and we need to do some mildly boring backtracking. Sadly, there's nothing I can really do to make this faster, so I'd suggest you just look around and enjoy the cave. Okay, Elijah, there is something I can do but won't. There is a rather offensively named perk called Divine Wind that increases your sprint speed. It's honestly a waste of a karma point. It also doesn't help when you manage to fall down the well you just climbed out of. In my defense, the secret I was looking for is kind of hard to spot. Now, the original Shadow Warrior vets may correct me on this one, but I believe this area comes from a temple level in the original called Master Leap's Temple. Master Leap was Wang's teacher of sorts, and they had some sort of a real weird dynamic where he gets killed and Wang goes to avenge him, but the original Wang is ancient, so it kind of makes me wonder how old his teacher was. Yeah, the plot of that game isn't very well thought out. The point is, this area comes from that place. There. Oh yeah, and his temple was also full of rabbits. Now to some more exciting stuff. We got a chi crystal and enough money to buy one of the coolest upgrades we are going to get. And it's a callback to the original Shadow Warrior too. Okay, first the powers. We're not dwelling on protection anymore, fuck that thing, it's not going to be seen again. Instead we get the calm pool upgrade for Flux. This makes flux affect enraged enemies. It is also the thing I keep thinking I already have, leading to all those completely inefficient fluxes we've seen. Now for weapons, we unlock the secondary mode for the PDW. It's called Akimbo and it does exactly what you would expect, doubles your damage output and ammo consumption. It's also cool as hell. In the original Shadow Warrior, Lo Wang was capable of dual-wielding his Uzis once he managed to find the second one. Here we just pull it out of our pocket plane. Wang space. Where guns go when they're tired and need a nap. Every FPS protagonist should have one of those. Anyway, the Akimbo mode turns the PDW into a tool of devastation. It also manages to turn one of its biggest disadvantages, its atrocious spread, into a somewhat good thing, since you generally don't whip up the second gun unless there's more than one enemy in front of you, and like this you just point it in the general direction of the enemy, hold both mouse buttons and watch shit getting torn apart. A somewhat interesting detail, if you take a good look at the guns Wang is holding, the added one, the one on the left, is actually unupgraded. Not really sure why they did this instead of just mirroring the model, but hey. This secret, by the way, is one of those you'd probably find much earlier in the level than I did if you were playing it. Just that the path I picked requires the least amount of backtracking, blah blah blah. We've been through this before. Now we are back at the hub area, and if you would, kindly focus your attention a bit to the left of my crosshair. Am I late, guys? Cocaine skeletons aside, this fight I don't understand. They spawn a lot of enemies, but they are all skeletons, they are completely harmless, and they spawn on the other ends of the area, which means they come at you pretty much one by one, just ready to be slaughtered. It's not challenging or interesting in any way, and honestly it feels really out of place in a game where most of the fights are designed pretty carefully. I mean, okay, we get to chop shit to pieces, but come on, if they went for that kind of enjoyment, they should have served as humans. Skeletons don't even scream in pain. Even winging them is kinda boring, and you can tell how disappointed I was since I didn't even pull out shurikens. Alas, the mystery of how many shurikens does it take to kill a skeleton will remain unsolved for now.
You think that thing's up there?
Doesn't matter what I think. If it isn't, we're both screwed.
It looked sad.
Not as sad as you'll be if we don't get there before it leaves.
A bit of confusion and jump cut. Really, I just got lost, and since I didn't even manage to hurt myself in an interesting way, you didn't really lose anything there. The perk I'm taking is Godslayer 2, 10% more damage to large enemies, you'll know the drill. It is also a decision I will come to regret come the next chapter.
Alright, weird mannequin, ghost, robot thing. Time to dance.
Did you want that to sound tough? It didn't.
Did you want that to sound annoying? Nailed it.
Thank you.
I am starting to get worried. I'm taking on some of Wang's talky phrase, speech, mannerism thingies. As I was saying, the damage perks may seem boring, but they are probably the most efficient way of spending your karma. That is, after you get your katana moves and money perks covered. Now this secret is a rather unique one. It contains a chi crystal, and chi crystals are normally placed in the main path. This one is missable, and you don't want to miss a chi crystal. I use it to upgrade Flux by adding 10 meters to its range, which I think increases it by about a third. This is also the last upgrade Flux will get for a bit. The other branch of that tree is not that useful. And thus we come to the final arena of this game. I'd suggest you take a good look at its layout and remember it for further reference. Now, while nothing particularly new or exciting happens in this fight, I'd like to talk a bit about the difficulty. This game is divided into 3 acts of sorts, and this is the final level of the first act. It is also the first level that I would consider genuinely hard, especially on the first playthrough for higher difficulty levels. This fight is sort of a final exam for all the mechanics that we've learned during the first act. It It's a wide open area with some cover, but most of it is destructible. We have a constant onslaught of enemies heading our way. We got normal demons, we got birdmen providing ranged support, we got a shaman constantly replenishing the enemy ranks, as well as trying to annoy the hell out of us using debuffs. And we're stuck in the middle with enemies on all sides, without the option to cheese it by using environmental damage. The only cover and relative safety in this fight is provided by the 2 rows of statues in the middle, and, well, try to note how many of those will remain standing at the end. Oh, by the way, I haven't talked about this. Shamans, similarly to warlords, can be dismembered, taking off the left hand, from Wang's point of view. We'll get rid of the fireball, taking off the right hand gets rid of the shockwave. You always want to get rid of the fireballs. The shockwave does much more damage, but it can be avoided fairly easily. You may also notice that corpses of large enemies can provide cover, and while I never really used that, the enemies do. Although it's probably more of a coincidence than a feature. In fact, that whole fight is a gauntlet designed to see how well you can dodge attacks, and generally fight without relying on help of the environment. This becomes increasingly important as the game goes on.
There she is. Calm down. She can't fight. She's a whisperer.
Whisperer?
A puppet. She's animated by an ancient. In place of a heart, she has a memory engraved in her.
That's fucked up.
Actually, it's quite clever. No creature from the shadow can even hold the Nobitsurakage. They call it the Shadow Eater. But whisperers, they can touch it. They're from the shadow, but they aren't technically alive. She's a courier.
Here we go. Okay, easy, easy now. Finally.
Sadly, although this part is playable, we have no choice here and have to stab her.
I thought the ancients were eternal, that I, like you, was beyond change. But then I saw you for the first time, and you looked for pity in my eyes. To my amazement, you almost found it. That memory has haunted me ever since. Still, your crying eyes nourished the realm with rain. Until Zing climbed to your temple, chalice in hand. Forgive me, sister. I did not foresee his treachery. Thanks to his poisoned cup, I saw you a second time, though not the way I would have liked. Zing's poison took you away, and with you, the rain. I took his head for it, followed my orders, and I believed them just. Still, you slept, and the rain withered in morning. I thought that I was beyond change, but now I sacrifice my memories of you. Allow a seal of blood to steal your image from my heart, and forget you, my own beloved.
Join me next time as we visit the Shadow Realm and fight our first boss.